It started with a phone call that almost no one heard except a whistleblower named Maria Vega. She was a quality control inspector at one of the largest frozen meat suppliers in North America. The call came from a frantic store manager in Ohio. "Your beef patties are leaking blood in the freezer." Within 48 hours, 4 more stores reported the same issue. But when Maria tried to alert her supervisors, she was told to stay in her lane. That's when she knew something was seriously wrong. Because what she uncovered over the next 2 weeks would unravel a tangled, dangerous web of expired meat relabeling, illegal chemical washes, and underground suppliers connected to some of the most trusted grocery store chains in America. This isn't just about bad burgers. It's about what's hiding in your freezer and how long it's been there. Every grocery store has a sell-by date. But what if that date was a lie? Investigators from the USDA and the FDA began secretly auditing shipments from multiple regional meat processors after multiple complaints surfaced in late 2023. What they found was chilling. Large-scale relabeling of expired meat, sometimes extending the shelf life by up to 6 months after the original expiration date. The scheme worked like this. Meat that had already passed its expiration was flash frozen, sprayed with carbon monoxide to preserve color, and repackaged with new barcodes. Some shipments were even sold under organic or grass-fed labels despite originating from low-grade, hormone-injected livestock. And these weren't obscure outlets. The meat made its way into stores like Save Mart, Value Fresh, and even certain Walmart distribution points in the Midwest. The problem? Once frozen, it's almost impossible for the average consumer to detect tampering, especially when the meat still looks bright red. If you think freezing kills all bacteria, think again. In February 2024, researchers from the University of Michigan published a study revealing that Salmonella and Listeria, 2 of the most dangerous foodborne pathogens, can survive deep freezing under certain conditions. And once the meat thaws, those pathogens reactivate like they were never frozen in the first place. Even more disturbing, some of the contaminated meat tested had been previously recalled, only to be quietly reintroduced into the market by third-party brokers who removed identifying packaging and resold it as generic or bulk product. Among the worst offenders was a supplier operating under the name Northfield Logistics, which had contracts with dozens of grocery outlets across Illinois, Indiana, and Missouri. The USDA later confirmed that Northfield had no actual slaughterhouse, only a warehouse used to store and process repackaged meat. By mid-2024, federal agents had traced nearly 2.8 million pounds of frozen meat to unregistered suppliers operating out of shuttered industrial parks and empty warehouses. These ghost suppliers had no USDA oversight, no inspection logs, and no legitimate business registrations. How did the meat get into stores? Through a loophole. Bulk distributors would sell the meat to private label companies, the off-brand, cheaper-looking options you often see in freezer bins. These brands, like Farm Choice, Meatco Select, or Patriot Pride, were often fronts. The brands didn't own any farms or factories. They existed only on packaging. Grocery stores, under pressure to meet rising demand for low-cost frozen meat, would stock these brands without thoroughly vetting them. In fact, some purchasing managers admitted they never knew where the meat was coming from, only that it was cleared for sale. But what does cleared for sale mean when the source itself doesn't legally exist? In May 2024, an undercover investigation led by 60 Minutes and a team of independent food safety experts went into 5 national grocery chains across 4 states. They bought 50 frozen meat products, including burgers, chicken nuggets, and pork chops, and sent them to 3 separate labs for analysis. The results were stunning. Nearly 30% of the products contained higher than legal levels of sodium nitrite, a chemical preservative linked to increased cancer risk. Several had trace amounts of veterinary antibiotics, which are banned in U.S. meat exports due to their risk of antibiotic resistance. But the most shocking result came from a pack of frozen meatballs sold under the name Rustic Table Select, marketed as all natural. It tested positive for E. coli 157, a deadly strain that's killed dozens in past food outbreaks. That brand, traced to a warehouse in Bakersfield, California, no longer in operation. Some stores advertised their frozen meat as fresh frozen, suggesting it was frozen immediately after being butchered to lock in flavor and nutrition. But in many cases, that's just clever marketing. In reality, fresh frozen has no strict legal definition. That means meat could be sitting in unrefrigerated trucks for up to 48 hours before being frozen, by which time bacteria has already begun to develop. And in several cases, the meat had already been previously frozen, then thawed, repackaged, and frozen again. This cycle, known as refreezing, can destroy cell structure, reduce nutritional value, and drastically increase the risk of bacterial contamination. Yet, unless it's caught in a lab test, there's no way for the average consumer to tell. And yes, many of these items are being sold in stores like Kroger, Albertsons, and discount chains such as Grocery Outlet Bargain Market. Everyone loves a bargain, but that $3.99 frozen steak could come with a cost far greater than money. Discount grocers often operate on razor-thin margins, making them more susceptible to cutting corners. When we spoke to a former regional buyer for a major discount chain, she admitted that sometimes the product came in unlabeled. We'd get a call later saying what brand to slap on it. In some cases, stores were unknowingly buying illegal imports frozen meat shipped from countries with zero food safety reciprocity with the U.S. like Myanmar, where pork production is barely regulated, or parts of Brazil, where illegal deforestation is linked to underground cattle operations supplying black market beef. These meats can enter the U.S. under false documentation, get frozen in a domestic facility, and land on grocery shelves before inspectors can even react. By the time someone reports an issue, the batch is long gone. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it's very real. To refresh old or discolored meat, some processors use chemical washes including diluted chlorine bleach, lactic acid, and peracetic acid to remove surface bacteria and restore pink coloration. It's technically legal under USDA rules if done within limits, but those limits almost never enforced. Insiders from two meatpacking plants in Texas and Arkansas revealed that meat up to 3 weeks past sell-by date was routinely washed, flash frozen, and resold off into dollar stores and low-income neighborhood chains. One former employee said, "The meat stank before we cleaned it. After the wash, it looked fine, but we wouldn't eat it ourselves." On March 9, 2024, a 6-year-old boy in Tulsa, Oklahoma, died from kidney failure caused by an E. coli infection linked to contaminated frozen beef. The family had purchased it from a chain called Fresh Value, known for its ultra-low prices. The beef was later traced to a batch relabeled and repackaged from expired meat at a distribution center in Kansas City. But by then, over 22,000 pounds had already been sold. A recall was issued, but it came 2 weeks too late. This tragedy sparked a congressional hearing, a DOJ investigation, and a massive class action lawsuit that is still ongoing. It also forced several retailers to quietly pull thousands of frozen meat products from shelves without explanation. So grocery stores are still safe. Experts agree. Big name chains with transparent sourcing practices are your best bet. Costco, for example, has direct contracts with U.S. farms and a strict no-relabeling policy. Whole Foods and Sprouts have traceability requirements that go back to the animal's origin. And Publix is known for maintaining rigorous cold chain integrity, meaning meat is temperature-controlled from farm to shelf. On the flip side, chains that rely heavily on third-party or international suppliers, like Save a Lot, Food for Less, and Family Dollar, have repeatedly failed inspections or been linked to questionable sourcing practices. This isn't just about meat anymore. It's about trust. In a world where food travels thousands of miles and changes hands dozens of times before reaching your plate, the freezer aisle has become a battlefield. Some of the brands you trust most might be hiding the biggest secrets. As more whistleblowers come forward and federal scrutiny increases, it's clear. This is just the beginning. And while flashy packaging and low prices might lure you in, they can't tell you the whole story. So the next time you reach for that bag of frozen meatballs or a budget pack of ground beef, ask yourself, do I really know where this came from? You won't find their names on any public grocery label, but these facilities are at the heart of a supply chain riddled with deception. Hidden behind legitimate distributors, over a dozen meat processing plants have been blacklisted by internal watchdog groups for failing safety inspections, falsifying records, or operating without proper licenses. One of the most notorious was a warehouse in Laredo, Texas, known only by its internal code TXM49. On paper, it was listed as a cold storage facility. In reality, it was butchering, packaging, and exporting meat without any on-site USDA inspector. A 2024 internal audit revealed that over 3.2 million pounds of frozen meat from TXM49 had entered U.S. grocery stores over a 2-year span. The meat was linked to dozens of listeria infections and one fatal case of toxoplasmosis in Georgia. Even after the facility was shut down, its stock continued to circulate, sold through liquidation brokers to unsuspecting distributors, some of whom later claimed that they had no idea of the source. How many of these facilities still operate under new names? No one can say for sure. You might think the USDA and FDA are keeping a close eye on every piece of meat you buy. But the ugly truth: oversight is limited and loopholes are everywhere. Small processors, especially those selling under 10,000 pounds per month, are exempt from many federal inspection requirements. These operations, often family-run or part of rural co-ops, fly under the radar. But in recent years, some have been exploited by larger networks who funnel expired or relabeled meat through them in exchange for a cut of the profits. Take, for example, a microprocessor in northern Idaho. On paper, it handled only local livestock and sold to nearby towns. But undercover agents found it was also repackaging imported frozen lamb from Bangladesh, a country with no formal animal health protocol matching USDA standards. That lamb was later sold in chain stores under a pasture-raised Idaho ground label. It was a complete fabrication. No fines were issued. No license was revoked. In fact, the operation resumed within weeks under a different corporate name. You've seen the sticker, grade of beef or USDA inspected. Sounds official, right? Here's the dirty secret. Those labels can be misleading, even meaningless. While USDA inspectors do verify certain aspects of meat safety, grading is often voluntary and paid for by the processor themselves. That means a company can pay for a graded evaluation, submit their best-looking cuts, and receive a glowing score, even if the rest of their meat is subpar or borderline spoiled. And for imported meat, it's even murkier. Products from countries with equivalent food safety systems can receive USDA-equivalent labels without being inspected on U.S. soil. These imports are cleared based on paperwork, not physical checks. And as we've now seen, paper can lie. In several cases, meat labeled USDA-inspected had been frozen, shipped from overseas, thawed in Mexico, and then trucked into the U.S. through Arizona or Texas, never touching a USDA-certified facility. Few consumers know that there's a dark underbelly to the meat industry. Closed-door auctions, where expired or excess meat stock is sold off to the highest bidder. These auctions take place in warehouse lots, cold storage depots, or even online under disguised platforms that require registration. Buyers include discount grocers, liquidation outlets, and intermediaries working for off-brand labels. Here's how it works. A major supplier overruns their production and can't store the excess. Or a batch approaches its expiration date. Instead of discarding it, the company sells it off, usually without disclosing its origin or age. Bidders can score 500 pounds of frozen chicken patties for pennies on the dollar. The issue: once that meat changes hands, all bets are off. New packaging, new branding, no traceability. It enters the market under innocent-sounding labels like Hearty Choice or Family Select. Some of this meat ends up in your grocery store freezer. Other times, it winds up in school cafeterias, hospital food services, or prison kitchens, anywhere that budget trumps quality. In 2025, the Food Integrity Research Group, FIG, released a shocking analysis. Some frozen meat products are being altered in ways that blur the line between food and laboratory experiments. We're talking about meat glue, a transglutaminase enzyme used to bind scraps of meat into one whole-looking cut. While technically legal, it creates an illusion of freshness and hides lower-grade pieces under a single steak facade. Then there's the growing use of textured meat filler, recovered muscle proteins whipped into a paste and frozen into shapes like nuggets, patties, or meatballs. The original cut of meat is unrecognizable, often sourced from byproducts that would otherwise be discarded. Shockingly, one FIG researcher found that nearly half of all frozen meat patties sold under generic brands contained more than 40% filler product, despite being marketed as 100% beef. We'd often assume that if it's on the shelf, it must be safe. But in today's food economy, that assumption can be deadly. This isn't fear-mongering. This is fact. Behind the barcode and beyond the freezer door lies a global web of shortcuts, deception, and greed. And while regulations exist, enforcement is stretched thin, and many bad actors slip through the cracks. So here's the truth. You have more power than you think. Demand transparency. Choose brands that disclose their sourcing. And never be afraid to ask questions about what you're feeding your family. Because what's frozen shouldn't be hidden.